Olivia Hartley never knew she was being watched. To everyone who knew her, Olivia was joyful, grounded, and full of plans for the future. But to Dorian Vexler, she was something entirely different, an obsession. For 6 months, he studied her routines, memorized her movements, and built a fantasy life in which she belonged to him. When fantasy met rejection, it turned deadly. What began as a quiet disappearance unfolded into one of the most chilling cases of digital stalking and murder in recent memory, a case that not only took a young woman's life but exposed a hidden world of predators operating in plain sight. Olivia Hartley's disappearance began like so many others, quietly, without violence, and without warning. On the morning of September 12, 2019, Olivia was expected at the dental clinic where she worked as an office manager. She had always been dependable. She arrived early, made coffee for the team, and never missed a day without calling. So when noon rolled around and there was still no sign of her, her co-workers grew uneasy. By 2 p.m., her manager tried calling her, no answer. They texted. Still nothing. That night, a colleague drove by her apartment, but her car was still parked in its usual spot. The lights were off and no one came to the door. The next morning, Olivia's sister filed a missing person report. Within hours, 2 officers knocked on her door. There was no sign of forced entry. Inside, the apartment was tidy, even cozy. A book was left open on the couch, as if she'd been reading it just hours before. Her phone, purse, and car keys were on the kitchen counter. Her favorite denim jacket still hung on the chair. A half-finished cup of coffee sat cold beside a plate with toast crumbs. It looked like she had left in a hurry, only there was no indication of why. Police initially believed she might have gone somewhere willingly. There were no signs of a struggle, no note, no blood, nothing to suggest violence. Olivia didn't have a boyfriend. She didn't party. She didn't have enemies. Her life was routine, peaceful, and full of plans. She had just booked a vacation to Costa Rica and had been talking about it non-stop with friends. She was in the process of moving to a new apartment, excited about decorating it from scratch. Everything about her recent activity pointed to a woman with stability and optimism, not someone who would disappear. Despite the initial lack of urgency from authorities, her family and friends launched their own search. Flyers were printed and plastered across Asheville. Volunteers organized search parties through nearby trails, parks, and wooded areas. A missing person alert circulated on local news channels and social media. Drones were flown overhead. Local businesses were asked to check security footage. But day after day passed with no new information, no sightings, and no leads. The growing silence around Olivia's case created a heavy dread. Her family refused to give up, and public attention was growing, but the lack of evidence made it feel like the ground had swallowed her. Every theory seemed to hit a dead end. It was as if she had simply vanished into the morning air. And in a small town where most people knew each other's names, the idea that someone could disappear without a single trace was chilling. 10 days later, the discovery of a body in the woods would confirm everyone's worst fear. Olivia hadn't left willingly. She hadn't run away. Something had happened to her, and whoever was responsible was still out there. The breakthrough came on the 10th day after Olivia vanished. A pair of hikers were exploring a dense trail in Bent Creek Experimental Forest, about 6 miles from Olivia's apartment, when they noticed something unusual: freshly turned soil beneath a cluster of pine trees, partly covered with branches. The smell was what made them stop. It was faint but unnatural. When they brushed away some of the debris, they saw part of a sneaker and immediately called the police. Investigators arrived and cordoned off the area. It didn't take long to confirm what everyone feared: the body was that of Olivia Hartley. She had been buried in a shallow grave, covered carelessly with dirt and leaves. The coroner later determined she had been strangled. There were bruises on her neck and arms, clear signs of a struggle. Scratches on her hands suggested she fought back hard. Olivia had not gone down without resistance. The discovery of her body turned a missing person case into a full-blown homicide investigation, and the tone of the police response changed instantly. The public, already tense, reacted with shock and grief. News of her murder spread fast. Vigils were held across the city. People left flowers and notes at the trailhead near where she was found. For a community not accustomed to violent crime, the idea that someone could murder a young woman and bury her like trash just minutes from where she lived was horrifying. Investigators scoured the scene for clues. They collected soil samples, examined tire tracks, and bagged every scrap of evidence they could find. But nothing immediately pointed to a suspect. There were no witnesses, no murder weapon, and no obvious motive. Olivia's phone, still at her apartment, offered no clues. Her digital records showed no strange calls, no online threats, and no unusual behavior. In the days before she vanished, detectives began to dig into Olivia's life, looking for anything that might explain why someone would want to hurt her. But they came up empty. She had no recent conflicts with anyone. No disgruntled ex. No workplace tensions. Her family insisted she had no secret problems. She was, by all accounts, just a regular young woman living a simple, productive life. Then, a neighbor came forward with something crucial. He had a motion-activated security camera pointed at the parking lot behind Olivia's apartment building. It didn't show much, grainy footage, poor lighting, but around 6:15 a.m. on the day she disappeared, it captured Olivia walking to her car. Behind her, just barely in frame, was a man in a dark hoodie, head lowered, walking a few steps behind. The footage cut off as they exited view, but that moment was enough to send a jolt through the case. It confirmed Olivia had left home voluntarily and wasn't snatched from inside, but it also suggested she wasn't alone. This man, whoever he was, had followed her. The timing was too close to be a coincidence. The question now was, who was he? And why had no one noticed him before? The search for answers had taken a darker turn, and the manhunt had officially begun. The blurry image from the security camera became the center of the investigation. Detectives enhanced the footage as much as possible, hoping to extract facial features or license plate numbers from nearby vehicles. The man's face remained mostly hidden by the hood, but the angle captured part of his profile for just a second. It was enough. Using facial recognition technology cross-referenced with DMV records and delivery company databases, police identified him as Dorian Vexler, a 35-year-old delivery driver who lived just over 2 miles from Olivia's apartment. Vexler had no criminal history. His name had never come up during the initial investigation. He lived alone in a modest one-bedroom apartment and had been working for a package delivery company for the past 5 years without incident. To neighbors, he was quiet, polite, even forgettable. But his name now set off alarms. Investigators began a background check and discovered that Vexler's route frequently passed through Olivia's neighborhood. In fact, delivery logs placed him near her apartment building multiple times over the previous months. Armed with a search warrant, detectives entered Vexler's home. What they found behind the locked door of a back room was both unexpected and horrifying. The room had been completely converted into what could only be described as a shrine. Dozens of photos lined the walls, some printed, some clipped from hidden camera stills. They were all of women, photographed without their knowledge in parking lots, grocery stores, parks, and even through windows. Several of the images were of Olivia. They also found multiple notebooks filled with obsessively detailed writings. Some pages were about his daily routines, others about his observations of women he encountered. Olivia had her own section, over 50 pages of entries describing her clothing, her expressions, her conversations with others. He referred to her as L, or my future. He wrote about imagined dates, imagined arguments, and even imagined reconciliation. It was clear he believed there was a deep, unspoken connection between them. The entries took a darker turn in the final days before her disappearance. There were signs of frustration, rejection, and fantasy merging with anger. One entry stood out: "She doesn't see it yet. She will. Or she won't, and I'll have to make the choice for both of us." DNA from Olivia's fingernails matched Vexler. There were scratch marks on his arms he had recently covered with gauze. When questioned, Vexler remained calm, saying little beyond denying everything. But the evidence told a different story. It appeared he had approached Olivia in the parking lot that morning, trying to talk to her. When she didn't respond how he expected, something inside him snapped. He forced her into his vehicle, drove her into the woods, and killed her. The calmness of his demeanor contrasted with the horrifying level of obsession and control detailed in his journals. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was premeditated. Long in the making. What disturbed investigators most was how normal he seemed on the outside, and how much darkness had been hiding just beneath the surface. After Dorian Vexler's arrest, the investigation widened. Detectives had a disturbing amount of physical evidence linking him to Olivia's murder: photos, journals, fingerprints, and DNA, but what came next was even more unsettling. While analyzing his laptop and external drives, forensic experts uncovered a trail that extended far beyond Olivia. The contents revealed he hadn't acted alone, not in ideology, at least. Buried in a web of encrypted files and private messages, they found a link to a forum hosted on the dark web. Its name was meaningless, a string of random letters, but its contents would shake the investigative team to their core. The site wasn't just a message board. It was a digital community of stalkers, thousands of members exchanging hidden camera footage, sharing methods for tracking women without detection, discussing GPS devices, spyware, and other surveillance tools. Vexler had been a highly active participant. He had posted photographs, notes, and even snippets of video he had taken of women, including Olivia. His posts attracted attention. Other users praised his detail and commitment, offering suggestions and encouragement. Some even asked for advice. What made this discovery more chilling was the scale. Membership records showed users from across the country. IP addresses were traced to suburban homes, college dorms, and office buildings. Most of the men had no criminal history, no obvious warning signs. They lived normal lives, had jobs, families, and friendships. But online, they existed in a secret parallel world where objectification and surveillance of women weren't just encouraged, they were celebrated. The FBI was brought in immediately. A joint task force was formed to investigate the network. Dozens of arrests followed in the months after, each one revealing more hidden caches of photos, names, and locations of unsuspecting women. In one case, an elementary school teacher was found to have been tracked by a man for over 2 years. In another, a college student had been filmed inside her dorm room using a hacked webcam. The sheer number of victims was staggering. Most never even knew they were being watched. As the scope of the investigation grew, media coverage exploded. What had started as a tragic murder now became the gateway to exposing a dangerous subculture hiding in the shadows of the internet. The public was horrified. Victims came forward in waves, and privacy advocates demanded urgent action. Yet, what disturbed people most wasn't the existence of such a forum, it was how easily it had operated. Unnoticed, for years, Dorian Vexler's name became infamous, not only for what he did to Olivia, but for the hidden world he helped reveal. He wasn't a lone predator. He was part of a much larger problem, one that had been quietly feeding off everyday life through the lens of smartphones, cameras, and unchecked online communities. The sense of safety in ordinary routines had been shattered. And Olivia's death was no longer just a tragedy, it was the catalyst for a nationwide reckoning. The trial of Dorian Vexler drew national attention. For weeks, the courtroom was packed with reporters, victims of the stalking forum, and members of the public who had followed Olivia's case from the beginning. The evidence was overwhelming. Prosecutors presented the journals, the photos, the footage, and the digital traces linking Vexler not only to Olivia's murder but to the broader online community of predators. Olivia's parents sat in the front row every day, staring down the man who had watched their daughter from the shadows and taken her life in such a calculated, remorseless way. Vexler showed no emotion throughout the proceedings. He sat quietly, avoided eye contact, and rarely spoke. When he did take the stand, he offered no apology. Instead, he described his obsession with Olivia as a spiritual connection, a delusion that chilled everyone in the room. He admitted he believed she was sending him signs, even though they had never spoken. He said that when she rejected him in the parking lot, he felt as if the world had betrayed him, and in that moment, everything changed. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning with a guilty verdict on all counts, including first-degree murder, kidnapping, and illegal surveillance. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, but the case didn't end there. Following the trial, Olivia's family channeled their grief into action. They founded the Olivia Hartley Foundation, dedicated to helping victims of stalking and pushing for stronger digital privacy laws. Through the foundation, they launched awareness campaigns, partnered with law enforcement, and lobbied lawmakers for updated stalking legislation that addressed the realities of modern technology. GPS tracking, hidden cameras, spyware, and online harassment had outpaced the law for too long. Olivia's story became the face of a movement demanding change. Schools, universities, and workplaces across the country began offering educational sessions on recognizing the signs of stalking and digital surveillance. Tech companies came under pressure to improve user safety, privacy settings, and reporting mechanisms. Several online platforms were forced to shut down after being linked to similar underground communities. Olivia's murder had exposed a terrifying truth. In a world filled with technology, it had become easier than ever to follow someone without their knowledge. Cameras were everywhere, information was easy to collect, and predators could remain anonymous behind screens. What happened to Olivia could have happened to anyone. That was what unsettled people most. In the years that followed, her story remained a cautionary tale. Documentaries were made. Podcasts dissected every angle. But for those who knew her, Olivia wasn't just a symbol, she was a vibrant, kind, intelligent woman with dreams, routines, and a life she loved. One that was taken from her by someone who believed he was entitled to her existence. The case left an entire community shaken. It changed laws, opened eyes, and revealed a hidden world few knew existed. And for many, even years later, it remained one of the most disturbing crimes they had ever encountered, not just because of how it ended, but because of how silently it began.